Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series, Racism, Evolution, History to Hope. We are very excited to have you join us tonight. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Vibrant Schools, and the NAACP. We're going to be having an exciting conversation and information about the Latinx community from some fantastic folks that are willing to give their truth, give their perspectives. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Lydia Cepeda.
Muy bienvenidos a todos. Welcome everyone. Soy Lydia Cepeda, orgullosamente chicana, proudly chicana. Before we start, the League of Women Voters, Tacoma-Pierce County, acknowledges that we gather on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, surrounded by their traditional waters in the shadow of Mount Tahoma. We actively seek inclusive and respectful partnerships that honor Indigenous cultures, histories, identities, and current realities. I request that the audience please all stay on mute and put your questions in the chat. Thank you. Let's start with some definitions. The US government defines Hispanic Latino as people whose ancestry is from Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, South or Central America, or other Spanish culture or origin, regardless of race. Hispanic/Latinos are the largest minority in the US, 18.5%, the largest in Washington State at 13%, the largest in Pierce County at 11.4%, and the largest in Tacoma at 12%. Latinx or Latine are gender-neutral, non-binary terms. I am Chicana, a female of Mexican-American heritage. I'm also Hispanic and Latina. Not all Hispanics speak Spanish. Some speak only English, others speak indigenous languages or other languages. We can be of any race, and we are often multiracial. We are often confused about how to fill out US forms. What race are we when most of us are mixed race? What race are we if we're 100% indigenous, but not from a registered tribe in the US? And why do you need to know what race I am anyway? 20% of my genetics come from indigenous tribes in Northeast Mexico. But does knowing that affect how you see me? There is much history that is relevant, but I want to touch on just 4 items. First, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848 ended the Mexican-American War. It annexed half of Mexico's territory and granted US citizenship and recognized the property rights of the Mexicans living in the territory, who were recognized as legally white. Given many were mestizo or mixed race and some were indigenous, they faced hostility by Euro-Americans. While the US Constitution states that treaties shall be the supreme law of the land and judges in every state shall be bound but thereby, Congress violated the treaty by shifting the burden of proof to Chicano landowners to demonstrate ownership. The Supreme Court and state and local courts and legislation throughout the annexed territory also undermined the treaty. As a result, most Chicanos lost their land and were also disenfranchised. Second point, annexation of the Mexican territory had negative impacts for Blacks because slavery was abolished in Mexico, and also for women. Under Mexican law, women could own property, and firstborn children, regardless of their gender, had priority of inheritance. Under US law at the time, firstborn sons inherited, and married women could not own property. Third, the Spanish-American War of 1898 resulted in the occupation of Cuba by the US and annexation of Spanish territories of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Guamanians and Boricuas are US citizens, but residents in those territories do not have voting members in Congress and residents are not allowed electoral votes for president. Fourth, during the 20th and 21st century, wars and occupations by US forces, US sales and trafficking of arms, and US demands for illegal drugs have fomented violence and instability in many countries of Latin America, resulting in large numbers of refugees. Now let's touch on just a few facts about Washington State history. Ask yourself, when did Latinos arrive in Washington State? The correct answer is 1592. There was a Greek explorer named Juan de Fuca who was working for the Spanish, and his Spanish and Mexican crew were the first Latinos and Spaniards to arrive here 200 years before the English. Later, in 1791, the San Juan Islands were named by Francisco Aliza, exploring under the authority of the Viceroy of Mexico. Orcas, Lopez, Güemes, Ana Cortez or Ana Cortes, Sucia Island, Harrow Island are all names that reflect this legacy. Recall that I mentioned the Mexican-American War resulted in the border crossing Mexicans, not Mexicans crossing the border. Starting in the 1850s, Chicano or quote unquote Mexican mule trains were the first reliable transportation system in Washington. Mule packing was dangerous and skilled work. These mule packers were later replaced by the railroad, which was completed in 1873. Carmelita Colon, a mule packer, was the first Latina mentioned in Washington state. During World War II, many Mexicans and Chicanos moved to the Yakima Valley to replace Japanese agricultural workers who were interned. From 1942 to 1948, the Bracero program contracted Mexican workers in agriculture and also the railroad in Washington state. During the 1950s, Chicanos, largely from Texas and California, settled in the Skagit Valley, working on farms and dairies. Latinx immigration increased in the 1990s as many fled violence and instability in their home countries. And the population has continued to grow and diversify in Washington, and is now the largest minority group in the state at 13%. Now we're going to hear from our esteemed speakers. They have personal stories to tell about their experiences. Each has between 10 and 15 minutes. I ask that you save your questions until all have spoken. Please put your questions in the chat. Our first speaker is Patricia Flores, Advocacy Coordinator at the Washington Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. Patricia.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you for that great introduction to this evening. As Lydia said, my name is Patricia Flores. I am the Advocacy Coordinator at Washington Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs in Olympia. And I identify as a Chicana, indigenous roots from my maternal grandmother, Tarahumara Raramuri from Mexico. My father immigrated to the United States, Texas, for work in the 1940s, the Bracero program that Lydia mentioned. And my mother was born in Wyoming to an immigrant farm working family who happened to be working in Wyoming when she was born. And they migrated over various states from Washington to Wyoming and back for work. I was born and raised on the Yakima Reservation, which is in central Washington, in a little town named Toppenish. And I'm very proud of my indigenous and Chicano roots. Born in Toppenish and raised there, as I said. My earliest experience of racism was at a very early age. As I said, I was born in Toppenish, and when I was born, my parents lived in a labor camp. There are various labor camps still throughout Washington and throughout the United States. And the labor camp we were in was a HOP labor camp, and that's where I was born, and that's where I lived for the first few years of my life, almost 6 years of my life. My father, as I mentioned, was a farm worker. My mother was too, but she stopped working and was a housewife. And every Saturday we would go into the grocery store as a family after he got off work to do our weekly shopping in Toppenish. And we came in one day and jumped out of the car, 2 parents, mom and dad, 3 little girls. I was about almost 6 years old. I had an older sister that was 9 and a younger sister that was 3, little ducklings following their parents. And we get out of this car and there's this large, and by large, I mean tall, big, strong, older white man screaming, yelling at the top of his lungs for us to go back to Mexico. And he looked like he was going to attack us. It was very, very frightening. And that memory is burned in my mind forever. I freaked out. I looked around. I'm like, who is he talking to? Why is he yelling for us to go back to Mexico? What is Mexico? Where is he telling us to go back to? Was it the name of the labor camp we were living in? I didn't even know it was a labor camp. It was home, right? So I just didn't know. I was very confused. I looked at my parents. They are amazing people. And they just stood tall, shoulders back, head held high, and continued to do what they needed to do, which was walk into the grocery store. So I really worked to stay with them and go into the grocery store. And we did what we needed to do, and we went home. And I was thankful that my dad didn't look scared. My mom didn't look scared. They just focused on what they were going to do. And that is a really, really scary thing for any child to go through. That was my first experience. There were other experiences also as I grew up. And then I became a wife and a mom. And another experience I would like to share with you is when our firstborn was 11. Well, during the time we were raising our children in Toppenish, there was a community pool. We would always have a family pass for that pool because we all loved to go swimming. So the kids would go. When the kids would go, we would go at family hour. We did a lot of swimming activities at the local pool this summer. So after dinner, our 11-year-old son wanted to go, and we didn't live that far from the pool. And he wanted to go, and we weren't going to go. And we said, yeah, go ahead and have fun, and we'll see you when you get back. So he left, and he came back within a few minutes, and he just had this puzzled look on his face. I'm like, what happened? Why are you back so soon? And he said, they wouldn't let me in. And I'm like, what do you mean they wouldn't let you in? And he said, I gave him our season pass number like I always do after I entered the doors. And they said, and this guy said, you can't come. It's not wetback night. And I said, let's go back. Let's go back right now. I was enraged. And he was embarrassed. He would not, he's like, I am not going back there. I am not going back there. So that was evening. The next morning, I called the Washington Human Rights Commission, made a report, and we went through that process. I could talk about more experiences that I've had, that my son, who is the firstborn and looks more Mexican than his siblings, has had. Their father is white, my ex-husband. And another time, his father went to a school. He was probably around that same age, and he was at his locker, and one of the kids, and he left, and he gave him a hug, and he kissed him on his forehead, and he said, okay, mijo, see you later. And the white child in the next locker said, that is not your dad. And John was just, again, like, what are you talking? You know what? And he's like, yeah, that is. He's like, no. He said, there's no way that could be your dad. This blue-eyed white man could not be your father. He didn't say that. I'm adding that to it. These kinds of things. And what I want to unpack here is these things happen to children. Where are they learning this? Where are they learning this? At home, in their nuclear family, on social media, on television? Where are they learning it? It is a learned behavior, and we have control over that. Even if they do pick something up that's negative and harming to another human being, we have the power as the parents, as the adults in their life, to talk to them about that and nip that in the bud. Nip it in the bud. Stop it. Another experience one of my grandchildren had was getting onto a school bus, looking for a seat to sit in. He was in about the 3rd grade. And another person from another culture said, I don't like Mexicans. And he came home and he told me about it, and we talked about it. And I said, I'm really sorry that, that you had to experience that on the bus, trying to find a seat. And I said, that was not nice. I said, I'm just wondering, how many Mexicans do you think he knows? And how did he know you were Mexican? How did, you know, where did that come from? That was ignorance, and it was harmful. It wasn't okay. And I'm really glad that you came home and you told me about it so we could talk about it, and that it's sad and it's not okay. And we're a very, very proud family, like everybody I know, really proud of our heritage, very proud of being Mexican, very proud of my immigrant heritage, hardworking, integrity. My parents were activists in their community. My father learned English. He always had a very, very strong accent, but he became an activist with the farm worker community in Toppenish, with other people who were leaders in that community, and saw the potential in him. And he became a part of the community action that was happening in Toppenish. And so I was raised around that, and using our voice is something that I teach. I've taught my adult kids, and I'm in the process of teaching my grandchildren. I am hopeful. I am very hopeful that we can change the trajectory on this. Having 46 in office was very, very discombobulating, very, very tragic, very, very heartbreaking, because then from the leadership in the United States, the top office, you have what I just expressed to you. I won't repeat what he said about what Mexicans are, but you all know. And it must stop. It has to stop. We can do better than this. Our future generations deserve that. We deserved that. I deserved that as a child. That man should not have been yelling. I do want to share, because my parents were so active in their community, I was part of a youth program, and in 7th grade of Chicano kids, Mexican kids, we were boycotting the grapes at Safeway, at that same Safeway where that man yelled at my family. I was 12 years old, part of the youth, they're boycotting. And I'm really, really proud that I have this, been shown this strength and this heritage and this innate being of who I am, that I have a right to be here, and so do you, and we're different, and that makes us really, really beautiful. Thank you.
Gracias, Patricia. Thank you so much, Patricia. That was really wonderful. Could everyone please be on mute? There's a couple of people in the audience who are not on mute. So please mute yourself. I will name names if I have to. Our next speaker is Sarah Irish, educator and advocate. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Irish, and I am not an educator right now. I'm not working as an educator. I'm a community engagement specialist, and I work for Molina Healthcare. But I also have a degree in education that I acquired in Mexico. But here in the United States, I have a degree on communications and broadcasting. And when I'm going to start my story, when I born in Mexico, my parents were immigrants from Europe. My mom is from Spain, and my dad was Lebanese. He passed like 18 years ago. So we witnessed all kinds of discrimination during my time to growing up, because my parents were immigrants and they were refugees. But I think my own journey started when I came to the United States for the first time as an exchange student. I did have the opportunity to have my parents being members of the International Rotary Club in Mexico. So I got the opportunity to come to the United States twice as an exchange student. My first time was in California, where I didn't learn any English because the family that I was living with, they want to learn Spanish. So everything, they tried to speak to me in Spanish the whole time. And I didn't mind because I was a teenager and I was lazy. But later on, I got the opportunity to move to a small town in Ohio called Bell Fountain, finish my high school, and as usual, the career counselors didn't know much about the immigration law, so they let me apply for colleges and everything. And thank goodness that my dad did have the financial means to pay for it. And I stayed and I graduated from college over there. That's where I acquired my communications and broadcasting degree. And then later on, I went back to Mexico and I moved to the United States in '94. I lived in California for a little bit, like a year, which I opened my eyes to the discrimination in many ways. Many things like people don't even care about if you are documented, undocumented, the fear of everything. La migra in those days was the scream on the street and everybody just ran. I witnessed a couple times shopping, grocery shopping, that somebody screamed La Migra and it looked like a scary movie where the shopping cart is still having the little tire rotating and everything is bare, empty, no people. And then having to wait for, my daughter at that time was 2 years old and we were waiting for the trolley to go to Santiago. We live in Encinitas and waiting for the trolley. Somebody yelled La Migra and my daughter said, let's run, mommy. And I said, we don't have to run because you see all these people running in fear because immigration was coming, La Migra. Then we had the opportunity to move to Tacoma and many incidents happened to me. And my first weekend here in Tacoma, I tried to attend church and some church, big church in the North End. And I entered the church. I didn't even speak. I didn't say a word. I was just part of the service. And when I was leaving the church, some lady sent me and handed me a note and say, the church for people like you is on the east side of Tacoma. So I decided that I wasn't going to attend church anymore because I got taught that you go to church whatever you feel like it. And it's not about what kind of person you are to go to a different church. So I stopped, even though now I live like 2 blocks from that church. I don't set a foot in that place ever. I don't know. I mean, I believe the things like that totally kill your joy and whatever, and I just don't do it. There is few incidents too. I also have to take a different kind of job and become a social worker by trade because the ability to speak English and Spanish, even though my accent sometimes was have been criticized and questioned, and even in presentations or conversations, I can say something and I have been ignored, my comment have been ignored, but if somebody else repeat exactly the same thing without the accent, it gets acknowledged. And I think those things are very discouraging sometimes, but instead of feeling that way, I've been fighting to make my voice be heard and encourage others to do so. I do train parents and other community members in leadership trainings and teach them the value of speaking up. When you mentioned the education, also is one of my passions. In the past, I was training parents to go to Olympia and advocate, and I encourage them to testify in Spanish. Because, and they were like, but nobody's gonna care. They don't gonna, yes, they do. Everything is recorded. And then our legislators have the obligation to hear everybody and find a way to understand and listen to our messages. But during, many other things I've been doing, but going back to my story, a few incidents happened. Later on, my daughter and my older son also start attending a school. And one time I recall that there was a lice infestation. And my older daughter has very dark hair. Without checking anybody's head, the teacher went right away for her. That girl is the one that brought the lice. I went and checked, I talked to the teacher, the nurse came and checked everybody's heads. My daughter was the only one that didn't have any lice. So, you know, that was the stereotyping of having dark hair and, you know, and a little bit of darker skin, even though my ex-husband is white too. Then that was one of the incidents. Later on, another incident with my daughter was the same thing. She was in a highly capable program. At that time, we live in South Tacoma, and they didn't have it in the North End. So the only school they have in was Mason Middle School, and it was like a fighting to get her in. And they say that they only have to give preference to the kids that live in the neighborhood. So we finally made it for her to attend Mason, but she wasn't able to get in the highly capable program. And the principal at that time promised her as soon as there was an opening, she was gonna join. But you know, kids, they want the urge to be part of the program. So she was going to ask her every week, may I come in? Am I accepted? Do you have room? So one time she ended up telling her, why do you want to be on the highly capable program? You're Mexican. So I have so upset. I report the principal. Actually, I moved my kids to University Place. I actually talked to the principal over there of the middle school, of the junior high, because they're set up a little different, and explained the situation. And he assured me that he was going to
It seems that Sarah,
missing out on my kids. You know, I'm going to give you take those kids because they're valuable, they're great students, those grades are amazing. I'm gonna take your kids. And also my son was an athlete, so they definitely took them. They finished their high school there. So that was one, and I didn't have no problems there, you know. And so I was a little hesitant when I got my younger son. But another situation happened. I was taking my kid to a daycare, and we were like very consistent for years. And after a few years, one of the girls that work in the daycare, she said, oh my God, you're such a great foster mom. And I was like, no, I don't have any foster kids. Yeah, Joseph. My youngest son is white, blonde, green eyes, doesn't look like me. So she thought that I was fostering that kid. And I said, you know what? That's my son. It's my real son. I give birth to him. And she was like apologizing and everything. And, you know, and my son get questioned about like, is she your mom? And he's like, yeah, that's my mom. I'm Mexican American. And he's very proud of it. So, you know, little things like that, but also, you know, in my personal life, like I mentioned, the accent, also, you hardly get invited sometimes, you know, even though you are part of big boards or big something, your possibilities to be an MC or do public speaking, you don't have those many chances because the accent. And for some people, having an accent means that you're not as smart. They see it as a deficit when we know that it's not a deficit. It's a great opportunity that make us, you know, we have other skills that not many people have. So yes. Yes, Lydia?
5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. So anyways, those back experiences that I have, and so thinking about my work and the opportunity, I'm just trying to get involved and become a role model for other Latinos. I encourage people to be the best that they can and speak up and don't put up with a lot of the things that I have to put up and prove myself, because it's exhausting to be trying to prove yourself. You have to work double and a half for many things, for jobs, for positions, for many things, but I'm proud of all my gains. And I would love to continue being a role model, not for just my kids, for others, and set up a better path and better community for the younger generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. I think I was triggered about 5 times during your talk. I think we all were. And our next speaker is Gloria Rodriguez, Vaccine Project Manager from Latinx Unidos of South Sound. And Gloria, I'll hold up my hand with 5 fingers and then 1 finger when you have 5 minutes and 1 minute. Go ahead, Gloria.
I would prefer the audible, please, as I am vision impaired.
Okay, I will do audible.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. I just want to go over some of my identities before I talk to you guys about. First, I'm going to do a general overview of my life, my background, and then I'm going to talk to you guys specifically about 2 of my identities. I am Latinx, Latinx in acknowledgement and solidarity of the LGBTQ community. I, from about middle school, have known that I am not the traditional sexuality that is expected of my assigned gender. Additionally, through the Latinx culture, through my dad being very, very traditional and also misogynistic, through our culture, and through other means, I have received very mixed messages about what is woman and womanhood. And I'm still in the journey of reconciling whether I identify as cis or demi-female or potentially non-binary or am genderqueer. I am not Latina. I am Mexican first and Hispanic second. My family is from Mexico, from Jalisco, Mexico, and Hispanic. Yes, I live in the United States, but my roots are in Mexico. Additionally, I am a citizen of Turtle Island. My family has been misplaced from our original indigenous roots in Mexico. However, I wish to eventually know of my indigenous culture. When we do our land acknowledgements here in the United States, I share an experience of many Latina, Latino, and Latinx, and that is being reminded that we are disconnected from our own indigenous roots and can experience traumas from being reminded of that misplacement and our desire to figure out who we are in that respect. Lastly, I am a follower of Christ. I am Christian, but acknowledge that Christianity has been spread through colonization. Christianity is a system that has been used to alienate and cause traumas to many people. I am Latinx and disabled. This is the mixed identity I will be sharing with you guys today. First, I want to share that I am first generation. My family is from Jalisco, Mexico, and through different periods of time, my parents, my aunts, and my uncles have traveled from Jalisco, Mexico into the United States, primarily in the 80s and 90s. I have an aunt who actually had to cross the frontera 2 times, which is a very life-threatening journey before she was able to effectively enter the United States. I also have a distinct, unique fact about me, which is I was incarcerated for the color of my skin before I was even born. My mom was detained in Las Vegas, and thanks to my aunt, was able to get out of jail and be able to meet my father in California. Also, I am the oldest of 3 students. My sister, the middle child, was born in Mexico and is a DACA recipient. She relies on a work permit, even though she is a college graduate. My brother and I were born here in Riverside, California. When we talk about race, it's really important to talk about all of our mixed identities, you know, being woman, being Christian, being low income, being disabled, being LGBTQ, all of this feeds into who I am as a person, the struggles and conflicts I have to share with other people. And what I have noticed throughout my life, in both the color of the skin and the distance at which I hold a sheet of paper to my face, is that people have decided what I am capable of for me without even getting to know me. And this has often been on a spectrum of the disabled kid can perform at the same level as someone in her grade level. Wow, she's an inspiration. Or, you know what, as long as this kid graduates high school, that's good enough. Well done, well done. When I was in kindergarten, I didn't have any help. I had to go in there And when my siblings entered elementary school, I had to help them with their homework. You know, I had teachers that would give me school assignments, and I would complete those assignments through the lens of my Latinxness, but it would be considered incorrect by American standards. In kindergarten, I had a teacher who gave me an assignment to just bring in a picture of anything that started with the first letter of my name, Gloria, so G. Gato, grapes, the color green, maybe a map of the Green River, anything would have worked. But like I said, gato at first, gato is the Spanish word for cat. I brought in a picture of a cat, and she was convinced that I had done the assignment incorrectly because cat started with C, but I was looking at a gato, which starts with G. I also had many experiences where students would look at me and try to communicate, trying to figure out, why do I look so close to certain things? Or why do I read a lot slower than them? And I didn't really understand that my vision was different, or that I was different because of my race, and also because of my having a disability. I also had experiences where in elementary school, I was always pulled out for Braille classes or for mobility classes, but I was also pulled out to learn English or for other special ed programs. I grew up in the Auburn School District, which is a very Latinx heavy school district, and was allotted resources because of that. But when I was in 4th grade, we ended up moving to Bonnie Lake. Bonnie Lake at the time is not what it is now. I remember when I was in middle school, we had just reached a population of 10,000 people. And just in the last year or two, they built 10,000 houses, which really illustrates the growth. But there was not a lot of resources for students if you were a student of color or if you were a student with a disability. I went to the School for the Blind for a short period of time because I had a special ed teacher that saw the lack of resources. At the School for the Blind, I was granted access to mobility classes, cooking classes. I had the opportunity to see that a job was something I could do if I wanted to pursue that sort of thing. And I also had the opportunity to be on the caseload for the why am I blanking on the vocational rehabilitation program that they had, where from middle school, I was always put into different classes about, what kind of careers you could have. In high school, I was able to participate in a summer program where the Department of Services for the Blind got me a summer job, which was at Pacific Science Center, and that was based on my career interests at the time. But I ended up returning back to public school. And that was during my latter half of my freshman year of high school. And I was immediately assigned nothing but special ed classes and had to undergo a journey and a fight to actually get into not only the general ed classes, but I wanted to get into the honors classes. But I can speak to you of multiple different times where, I was given some sort of award when you go into elementary school and they do the teacher writes a little certificate in a paragraph of what the student has done, whether they're a good listener, they always turn in their assignments on time. Mine was always like, she gets her schoolwork done, even though she looks through a little monocular. And in 5th grade, I was actually pulled out to go to the 3rd grade spelling class, which was embarrassing for me, but apparently that was enough for me to be impressive and get a reward. So having to communicate to people that I actually wanted to be in honors classes was really challenging. I also had many times where, people would see me out with like a white cane, or I'd be in the grocery store with my parents and I'd be speaking Spanish, and there's a person who turns around. I specifically remember this one person at Winco, and he's like, "You're in America, why are you speaking Spanish?" And that was a really hard thing for me to discern, what exactly was like my level of achievement. And even now as an adult, when I do something, it's hard for me to discern, am I selling myself short? Am I just being humble? Or did I actually do something impressive? And when we're talking about what?
5 minutes.
Perfect. So when we're talking about race, when we're talking about people's value and their self-worth, there are other factors that are counted into that. So people can, decide that you don't have rights, or you're not worth the time of day because of the color of your skin. They can decide that because you have a disability or because you're low income. But in recent years, we're really looking at what those intersections are and how they overlap and benefit each other in terms of relationships. In all of these big systems that we have, at the education system, it doesn't just exist on its own little island. It touches, social economic status. It touches, the government, all of these things. We're super interconnected and super interdisciplinary. So that's something I really wanted to talk to you guys about. My Latinidad does influence my faith. It influences my being a person with a disability. And when we talk about race and our social structures, there really are a lot of times where people, even within your own Latinx community, they'll look at you and say, okay, this is what you can do, or this is what you're worth. Like, there are people who just praise me for having graduated high school, and I have a master's degree, but because I'm Latinx, because I'm low income, that's viewed very differently from, a Black person having a master's degree, or a person who identifies as African American or Afro-Latinx. So if you take anything away from what I've shared, it's one, expectation level is not based solely on one label, one identity. Two, being able to think in broader, more diverse terms is so essential in such an interdisciplinary and interconnected world. That is all I have to share with you guys.
Gracias, Gloria. That was amazing. Thank you. Our last speaker is Manny Santiago, the Executive Director of Washington State LGBTQ Commission. Manny.
Gracias, Lydia. And I also won't be seeing you because I'm going to be reading the script. So if you can give me the verbal cue, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan Manuel Santiago Rodriguez. While I live in the lands of the Puyallup, my roots and my ancestors are in the land of the Taino in the island of Boriquen, as well as the lands of the Yoruba people in Western Africa, and I am a direct descendant of the Moors and Berbers of Al-Andalus in the Iberian Peninsula, Northern Africa. And my story tonight begins in 1970. My family is from the mountains of Puerto Rico. We come from Jíbaro origins. And although today the Puerto Rican society has adopted the image of the Jíbaro as the icon of Puerto Ricanness, this was not always the case. Jíbaros are usually poor peasants from the countryside, usually from the rural mountains of the island. Our culture is that of hard work, strong family values, communal lives, where children's households are extended to those around us, such as neighbors and church communities, etc. Historically, our communities have been denied access to quality education, to health services, and to job opportunities outside of subsistence farming and other opportunities like that. Our communities are usually far from the centers of town, and due to the extension of some of the farms, our people live in isolation even from their own neighbors, as our homes can be several miles away from each other. This is still the reality of my Jíbaro people, and it was even more dire back when my parents were young. In 1970, when my story begins, was the year that the woman who became my mother moved from her parents' house in the small settlement of Castañer, which you can see in my background, to the home of a wealthy family in San Juan, the capital of the island, to work as a nanny. That same year, she had to say goodbye to her island and all she knew to relocate with that family in New York City. The time she spent in New York City was so impactful that exactly 30 years later, in 2000, when I was on my way to relocate to New York City myself, she had two things that she wanted to share with me. First, she said, "You are not going to like the coffee." And she was right. After having grown up in a coffee farm, it is completely difficult to find good coffee anywhere. They actually shipped some coffee from their farm to me. The second thing that she wanted to share with me was this piece of advice. Do not trust white people, she said. Now, I do not know all the details of my mom's time in New York City. And although we have talked about some things, she has never shared with me why she wanted to caution me about this. And of course, we are in a different historical time. And since I moved to the mainland 20 years ago, I can confidently say that my mom's generalization, albeit true for her, has not been my own experience. Nevertheless, I have experienced many instances of bias, rejection, discrimination, microaggressions, and overt as well as subtle racism. I have also experienced instances where my mom's words have rung true. And I would even extend that to US Americans in general, who are often suspicious of anyone with an accent. Now, my navigating the workforce in the US has been an adventure for sure, and one in which I have been leaving parts of myself behind along the way. Take, for instance, my first experience in the workforce once I landed in New York City. As I said, my name is Juan Manuel Santiago Rodriguez. However, due to the naming customs of Northern European cultures who first displaced indigenous folk in this country, my mom's family name, Rodriguez, had to be dropped. Then I realized that my compound name is not the custom either, and thus, in my first job, instead of being Juan Manuel, I became someone else. Not only was I made to go by Juan Santiago, which, by the way, it's my uncle, not me, I also became Juan Santiago or something like that. That's how my first boss called me. I hated it so much that I started going by Manny, the nickname some of my college friends call me. Years later, while in graduate school in Boston, I went to the school's mailroom to pick up a package that my family had sent. When at the mailroom, I asked the grad student behind the counter for my mail. She only spoke English and couldn't find any package for Juan Manuel. I could see the box right behind her and told her so. She smiled and told me right to my face, "Oh, you meant Juan. Juan." It didn't matter how much I tried to correct her on my own name. She insisted that I was pronouncing my name wrong and that in English, it was Juan. I kept shedding parts of myself. Now, 2 masters, some doctoral studies, and years of public speaking, leadership training, job experiences, and books, articles, and commentaries published later, I landed a wonderful job in a great small city in Washington as their executive director. The place is diverse and wonderful until, supposedly joking, a senior member of my staff calls me little poor Hispanic boy. Now, it was just a joke, right? But I was paralyzed. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to come off as the new boss who is too demanding and who can't take a joke, but it hurt. Now, poor is my background, and I do not deny it, but this person was using it as a joke, quote unquote, a joke that had way more into it. It was a reminder that I was not like them, a reminder that I didn't quite belong to their specific class. I was a boy, quote unquote, a boy because I was slightly younger than this person. It was a reminder that no matter how much experience I had, no matter how much confidence the board and the community and even the other members of the team had in me, I was just a little poor Hispanic boy. Although I was the director of the agency until the last day this person worked with us, I was that little poor Hispanic boy. I never said a word because in this context, no matter how prepared you are to face the blatant instances of racism, the weight, the pain, the hurt, the exhaustion, and even the fear of retaliation is so much that your survival instincts kicked in. And in this case, it was just freeze. I froze. I spent a couple of years navigating this situation, which was compounded by other internal conflict. It escalated to the point of making me feel unsafe in my own workplace where I was the boss. I shared this with my mom throughout the whole ordeal, and she just kept reminding me of her words. Now, these are not the only instances of discrimination and blatant racism my family and I have experienced, of course. I had the luck of meeting and falling in love and marrying the most gorgeous Mexican man that Mexico sent to Washington, or at least according to myself, right? Now, my husband is a proud descendant of the Maya and Yucatec people of southern Mexico. To our knowledge, there is not one hint of European or African ancestry in his lineage. He and his family are proud of their indigenous roots. However, when we were filling out the paperwork for his residency and eventual citizenship, he was denied being identified as indigenous. He explained to the authorities his ancestry and why he didn't feel comfortable picking any other identifier, but it was not possible. Only the federally recognized tribes in the US and certain Canadian First Nations have that option. The staff who helped him with his application chose quote unquote white for him. White is the race in his immigration documents. My very proud indigenous husband is white according to the system that denies us self-identification while at the same time insists we must neatly fit into one racial category. A few years ago, my niece through my husband's side, a brilliant, funny, intelligent, beautiful, brown Mexican-American girl with cinnamon skin, basalt black hair, and big, inquisitive, dark eyes, was acting up. Her mom asked if I could talk with her. So when appropriate, I invited her for a walk and started chatting. We stopped at the little pond by her apartment complex and chatted a little bit. She told me she was being bullied in school and didn't want to say anything to her parents. She didn't want to get in trouble. I asked her to share more of what was happening. And she said, and I quote her, "I do not trust white kids. They're always making fun of me and my friends." My mind went back to my mom's words so many years before. Now, my sobrina, my niece, shared with me that a group of white kids were saying her beautiful cinnamon skin was dirty. She was a dirty Mexican. They made fun of her Asian friend's eyes, and they also made fun of the beautiful dreads of her black friend. I asked why she didn't tell someone else at the school, like a counselor or a teacher, and she said that they had. The counselor just dismissed them as children being children. The teachers just told them over and over and over again to go to the counselor, the same one that had told them that it was just child play.
5 minutes.
My niece and her friends decided to just stay quiet. She started acting up because the burden of racism was too much to carry by herself. And as a preteen, she didn't have the tools to know how to navigate all this. Now, I shared with her my mom's words. I shared with her that this was not new. Our communities have been experiencing this for a long time. We talked on how my mom, myself, and her have all been part of a system that doesn't quite see us as the same as others. I told her about the long history of activism to overcome this. I shared with her the many collaborations between indigenous, Black, Latin, Asian, and mixed race folk to liberate our communities from these violent acts that crush our souls. I also shared with her the many advances that we have made in the struggle for justice and equity. I reminded her that she was not alone in this, that we were all with her. I reminded her how beautiful we are, our skin that comes in every tone, our accents that reveal our intelligence as many of us can speak more than one language. I reminded her that the hardworking parents that she has, who have worked so hard to protect her and give her all the opportunities that they were denied back home precisely because of the indigenous identity. I reminded her that we are always moving forward. I also made a promise to my sobrina that day. I promised her that I will not stop working to make sure that she and her friends were safe. I promised that I will continue working so if she ever decides to have kids, her kids will not have to go through what my mom, myself, and now her have gone through. Yes, we are hurt and in pain and exhausted of carrying this burden of racism with us. And we are not asking you to help us carry it. We're asking that you all join us in getting rid of the burden altogether. I am asking you, inviting you to help me deliver on my promise to my niece. So the words of my mom that my mom shared with me, which my niece repeated without ever having met my mom, don't have to be repeated ever again. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. That was very powerful. Thank you very much to all the speakers. We are now going to have breakout rooms. We'll have 15 minutes for the breakout rooms, and then we'll come back. And as we are going into the breakout rooms, I will just offer some questions as we're waiting that you may want to think about. And that is, go ahead, Cynthia, you can start putting people in breakout rooms. Patricia, what's your experience as a Latina? How has that shaped your interest in serving survivors of sexual assault? For Sarah, think about how has your name, which doesn't reveal your identity, what happens when people find out that you're a Latina? Gloria, what characteristics of the Latinx community in Washington make them particularly vulnerable to COVID-19? And Manny, tell me, how many times have people assumed that you are not a US citizen and how important marriage equality is to you? So those are just some questions we might want to think about talking to, just to prime the pump, so to speak. So back, everyone. I think everybody's getting back. If people could please put some comments in the chat about what they think we need to do to move forward, that would be helpful. In the meantime, I would really like Manny to share his story about having to fill out race in the immigration papers for his husband. If you could do that, Manny, that would be great.
Now?
Yeah, now.
So we were talking about that earlier. I made reference to this on my talk, but so my husband is indigenous, Yucatec, Mayan. No, as far as we know, no trace of any other ethnicity or race in his community. Very proud. His grandparents spoke Yucatec as a primary language. So until the Mexican government suppressed indigenous languages. So, but anyway, so when we were living together already, but marriage equality was not a reality yet in Washington. It was on the ballot. But at that time, the Obama administration had set up an executive order to instruct immigration services to extend any protections to same-sex spouses in the states where those marriages were legal. So we were engaged in the marriage equality fight here in Washington and helped. You know, my background is in ministry, so I worked as a pastor for many years, and I was working on kind of framing the theological framework for marriage equality in the state. So when marriage equality was a reality in Washington, we got married and started the process for immigration. But then the problem was that for immigration purposes, you must select your race. So they have ethnicity as a separate section, but you must pick a race. And he was then, even though it's one of the categories, Native American, you cannot pick Native American unless, and this is for immigration, by the way. So you cannot pick Native American because that's only for federally recognized tribes. And in the case of the United States immigration system, for First Nations in Canada, but no Mexico and no other Latin America or Finland, who has a large number of indigenous folk. So of indigenous European folk. So anyway, so it was really weird. It was really hard, and it was really painful because the immigration officer just selected for him, this is what you're going to be. You're white. And if you see my husband, he doesn't look white. He's not white. He's indigenous and very proud. So it was really hard. And it happens in many instances with government forms that don't allow you to select something other than other categories unless you are from a federally recognized tribe, which I appreciate that we want to support and recognize the sovereignty of indigenous folk here within the boundaries of the United States, but also we need to start recognizing that there are actual indigenous folk outside of the boundaries of the United States. So, yeah.
Thank you, Manny. So we have one reaction from the audience. To keep moving forward, I think more opportunities are needed like this. This has been so valuable for me and my son. Thank you. We wonder if opportunities like this for high school kids would be valuable too. Absolutely. We need to bring high school and middle school, and probably even if we could get grade school kids in. Anyone, Sarah, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I think preparing the new generation and share, the issues are a little different and from different perspective. So the children have the opportunity to share their experience about how they get discriminated based on the looks of their parents. I also think the same way with like last names or things like that. So I think that'd be important to hear, and it helps educators and adults to be more empathetic and encourage other children as a, educate our children better to become more respectful. So that's what I feel like it. So that'd be a great opportunity for adults to hear the perspective of the younger generations.
So
And
if
Sarah,
people-
let me just echo, I really can attest to that. Vibrant Schools, we're getting ready to launch something called a Youth Activism Academy just for youth voices. I have so much confidence on our younger generation being the lead right now. When you look what's happened with the movements, with the Black Lives movements and all the other movements that take place in the last 18 months, it's the younger people that are really pushing the envelope right now. And I just feel as an elder that it's my responsibility to help guide, not teach, not make decisions, but to give them the guidance so that they can be the activists that I truly believe our younger generation can be. And I think they're going to be our change agents. I have a lot of faith in our youth. I really do.
So if people want to make comments, they can also raise their hand, but we have a comment from Rosemary Powers about, we discussed the importance of interventions when witnessing aggressions, such as our amazing speakers described tonight. Bystander training can help. And then room 1 discussed ways to develop skills for targets of racist comments and the potential allies. And I can't see the raised hands. Oh, here we go. Jennifer Lopez Silvers, go ahead.
I just have a question, and I'm not sure if Manny can answer this or not, Mr. Santiago, but I have a question around with your husband, because you were talking about how I know our immigration and our kind of categorizing of people is fairly limited. It's becoming a little broader, but it's still limited. Down in Mexico, does anybody know, would his specific indigenous be like identified on something down there? Just out of curiosity.
Race relations in Mexico are very different than here, very, very different. And I'm not completely aware of the nuances of that. I do know what he tells me, and he's been in the States for 20 years, so it's quite removed now. But one thing is that his family is very clear about their ancestry, very clear about their indigenous identity, and as he says, Mexico uses us to sell tourism, but doesn't really care about us. So, and how they identify and how they collect the data and all that, I'm not completely sure. But yeah, Sarah and Gloria have their hands
Gloria.
up. They
Yeah,
are Mexican, so they might know a little bit more about this.
Yeah, Gloria, I think, had her hand up first. So then, and then Sarah. Gloria.
Go ahead, Sarah. Mine was in regards to the topic we were on prior to this question.
Yeah, so I think for Manny's husband, there is no very difference like for the indigenous people. There is a lot of discrimination down there, and it's based on the skin color. But I don't think when you identify yourself, you just mentioned they only ask you for citizenship. There is not a racial difference that I know, at least when I moved here, it wasn't. I know that many things changed since I moved here. But when I was growing up, it wasn't even an opportunity. You were a Mexican citizen, but they never asked you for race or skin color or anything else. So that I know that nothing that I'm aware, but if they look different, there was a lot of discrimination from because it's like in every other culture, with the lighter skin, the more privileged, the darker, less fortunate.
Gloria.
When thinking about continuing conversations in events such as this, one thing that just came to mind was including programming for students who are of mixed descent or participants who are of mixed descent. When I was in college, we had programming for people of color, just entire BIPOC community lumped in together, and then for people who identified as white, but there wasn't anything for the spectrum or the in-between. And that's the experience of some people, you know. They could have a parent who is Black and a parent who's Asian, and sometimes they feel like they don't 100% belong with the Asians, and 100% they don't 100% belong with the Blacks, and that is a very alienating experience as well. And even though I am Hispanic, I do experience that as someone who's asexual, having that same phenomena of, like, you know, sometimes I feel alienated because I don't exactly belong with the straights, and I also don't exactly belong with the gays sometimes. So thinking about mixed race identity is something I really just want to emphasize, even though unfortunately that's not a community I identify with. I have seen that is a very important thing to also include.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Patricia a question and about how your experience as a Latina have shaped your interest in serving survivors of sexual assault, your day job. You know, do you see special vulnerabilities aside from the obvious one of language and maybe papers?
Yeah, immigrant status and language. And then, you know, in our communities, we have indigenous communities from Mexico that have come over here. So Spanish is their second language. Their indigenous language is their first language, and Spanish is their second language. And do we have advocates that speak that language? So there are so many challenges. And I can't say that that is the reason that I do the work I do, but it is very near and dear to my heart. And serving, when we have community sexual assault programs that aren't serving those communities, one of my questions is, why not? And then the next answer may be, well, we don't have the staff. Why not? What is going on? We cannot say we're serving all communities regarding domestic violence advocacy or sexual assault advocacy if we're not serving all communities. And so those things are things that definitely that are a part of a priority for me because of who I am, and working with tribal communities also. As Gloria mentioned, you know, Turtle Island, tribal communities from this continent that are here in the area of Washington State, that the child sexual assault programs may be getting calls from on their crisis line. So most definitely it's part of my work. It's near and dear to my heart because those are the communities I come from and the intersections are there. I would say it's not what brought me to the work, but it is a huge part of the work that I do.
Yeah, I know that in my experience, it's been very frustrating, the whole language justice issue, and trying to get people to be able to get services in the language they speak. It is just so devastating to hear about children being used as interpreters for sexual assault or domestic violence. There's just no excuse for that. You know, and the fact that there are so many people who maybe they assume they speak Spanish and they don't at all. It's a foreign language to them. They might speak a little and it's assumed that they speak it, but no, they actually speak indigenous languages. And the other thing that drives me crazy about the systems are if we translate something into written Spanish, then therefore we have done our job. And that is not the case because there are so many people who, you know, they may speak Spanish, but they've never been educated in Spanish, so they cannot read, or they may have a 3rd or 6th grade level reading. And translating legal documents into Spanish is not helpful. So, yeah, and another question from Gloria, if you could speak to, you're working on COVID-19 vaccines. If you could speak to the special characteristics of the Latinx community in Washington and Pierce County that make them particularly vulnerable, because of COVID-19. That would be really. Gloria, you're muted.
Our Latinx community has a wide variety of different challenges that they experience in receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, but as well in their health and their immune system. One of the variables that's kind of unique to the Latinx community is a preference or heavy usage of alternative medicines, natural remedies over vaccination. Oftentimes families will only be vaccinated for school requirements. And though I myself do tend to prefer natural remedies, there is a lot of science and a lot of studies that say that this can be debilitating, not taking advantage of modern medication that can make them particularly vulnerable. A lot of Latinx community members, I myself included, don't regularly get their flu vaccine. That is something that can be a contributing factor. However, this statement is more speculation as there haven't been specific studies related to it. A couple of things that make it challenging for our Latinx community to get the vaccine are that our community oftentimes cannot take time off of work in order to get the vaccine, or they don't have a job or transportation that works with that schedule or works geographically. In terms of any medication or comparisons as far as the racial breakdown and susceptibility, there isn't a lot of study on that.
Thank you. Jonathan Johnson has his hand up. Would you like to comment, Jonathan?
Yes, thank you. I just had a hard time finding the unmute switch. It's always a problem. And after a year and a half of doing this, I'm surprised it still takes so long. Well, I'd like to thank everyone who participated tonight, because when you hear another perspective, you get a chance to learn. And I've been informed by our great speakers tonight, finding out about different parts of our institutional racism that causes you to choose a box that doesn't mean anything to you. For people to choose, to have to determine what racial box you will fall into. And by the way, race is a social construct, not based on any scientific fact. Why, in fact, do we continue to use the terms that marginalize us? And it's, to me, it's kind of sad that I go back to a teacher I had in school that was teaching about math and writing checks. And she said, when you write a check, when you say "and," there's a period. When we say this is 2021 or 2021, if you use "and," you're putting a period in there and saying it's actually 21 or 20.21. If we were to actually use the language appropriately, we can tell folks there is no such thing as race. There's the human race. And if you aren't interested in being a part of the human race, that's your choice. But I'm going to be part of the human race. Now, that's probably the strident view, but I'm just curious, why do we get stuck with this? And what is it that we can do to change the narrative on that? I was very impressed with Patricia's recommendation that we find ways to use the techniques that have been effective in anti-violence, to become allies for people who are under attack, what's safe to do. We need to be active with those things. When I think of one of the stories or several of the stories, someone telling how they were so shocked by what was said to them, they lost all of their power. But if we can find a way for them to have been prepared for that comment and to be able to respond in a way that disarms that situation, we have completely changed the narrative. But before we do that, we just can't remain passive and let them take our power. But I thank you for this opportunity. It's a little different than the first two that I was involved with, but it's good for us to hear another perspective. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all tonight, and thank you for participating, and look forward for you coming together for the 6th session, because we need to find some common threads where if we do one thing together, we take out some of these obstacles together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and the common thread around this, again, race is a social construct, as Latinx community knows every time they have to fill out a demographic form. And it's about power, and it's about privilege, and it's about property, and it's always been defined in the US as access to power, privilege, and property. We have come down to our closing time, and I want to thank our speakers, Patricia Flores, Sarah Irish, Gloria Rodriguez, Manny Santiago, for their time, their stories, for their courage and their wisdom. And I want to thank the co-sponsors, League of Women Voters Tacoma-Pierce County, Vibrant Schools, and the NAACP of Tacoma. Finally, I want to thank you, the audience, for participating. Buenas noches, everyone. Take care and keep it up. Bye-bye.